Hi there. I'm Josh Hanish with 329. I have a special guest today, Andrea Close, who is an attorney with S&P Law Corporation here in Sacramento. And this is a really exciting interview for me because we deal with ADA web compliance every single day for all of our clients. And I thought it'd be really beneficial for us to interview an attorney who deals with helping business owners handle ADA web compliance, especially when it comes to getting demand letters and potentially lawsuits. So I would like to introduce Andrea. Thanks for joining us today, Andrea. I really appreciate you giving us your time.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So we're just going to go through a couple questions that we prepared in advance. And so first, I know I've already introduced you, but could you just tell us your name and your specialization as an attorney?
Sure. My name is Andrea Close, and as far as specialization, I mean, generally speaking, SMP works with businesses in California, and we cover a wide range of issues with respect to those businesses. Unfortunately, California is a fairly litigious state, and businesses are oftentimes on the wrong side of the V. So we deal with business formations, and then any kind of litigation issues that they crop up. And so oftentimes, unfortunately, the ADA compliance issues, whether it be physical or technical, seem to be one of those things that many of our clients have to deal with.
Yeah. Is it fair to say that there was definitely a rise in like physical ADA lawsuits back in the 90s, 2000s? And is that kind of dipped and then you're seeing a rise in ADA web compliance issues now?
I think it depends on the location mostly. I think since COVID and people were generally spending more time just in their homes and on the internet, you're not walking through the local, older grocery stores or restaurants where you're seeing those typical kinds of issues. And I think with just a wave of people spending more time on websites, this accessibility issue is definitely something that's increased since I'd say the 2020.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Um, and can you go over just as you know it, what the ADA web compliance laws are and how they affect private businesses?
Yeah, so I won't bore you with necessarily all the details because it can get really technical. But I mean, generally speaking, right, the ADA is meant to deal with discrimination of various kinds. And in this case, what we often see with ADA compliance with respect to websites is usually whether or not disabled individuals are able to properly access, understand, and interact with those websites. And so, whether or not you're a visually impaired individual and you're not getting the hearing component, or there are certain kind of text sizes or links that aren't containing those texts so that you can maneuver through websites. As I'm sure you're aware, you can have websites that are really complicated to move through, and so sometimes we see those individuals with disabilities having issues there, and so those accessibility laws are meant to make it easily available and usable for those individuals.
Yeah. And from the research that we've done, there's a handful of attorneys that are responsible for a majority of these demand letters and lawsuits being filed for ADA non-compliance on websites. Um, I know that there's definitely individuals that truly can't use a website and they file a grievance saying that they can't use that. But are you seeing the same thing on your end where instead of it being like individuals that truly can't access a website, it's more of these like predatory attorneys who are going after business owners that they know obviously aren't ADA compliant on their website, but then furthermore, they feel like they have the resources to pay off a demand letter.
It's unfortunate. I think in certain situations where you've got a law that is beneficial, I think, to plaintiffs, right? I mean, there's injunction, there's statutory penalties that come with this. There's attorneys' fees that can be paid. Those types of statutory schemes allow, I think, a different kind of approach, right? So you're more likely to see attorneys who or plaintiffs who have done this before do it again. And I mean, attorneys, I mean, we do this all the time, right? I mean, I don't practice 17 different kinds of law. We stick to what we know. And unfortunately, there has been some predatory practices with certain kinds of plaintiffs, but I've also seen it where there are just people trying to access websites that, that simply can't. So it really does go both ways. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of business owners don't recognize that this is something that they need to do. You hire somebody to build you a website because it's the way of the world, without sort of realizing that there's all of this other stuff that comes up with, the ADA and, California's version of that.
Yeah, definitely. We've likened it to, you know, you hire engineers, you hire builders to build you a physical location, and they advise you on everything that you need to have in place for ADA compliance, for wheelchair ramps, for bathroom accessibility. And we view our job very similarly. We build the online storefront for all of our clients, and we know what quote unquote ramps need to be in place on the website, or the for lack of a better term, like what the like egress needs to be within certain areas on the website. If you're going to keep that analogy to like a physical location going, where a lot of, at least in our industry, a lot of agencies seem to just want to get websites out the door, and they're not advising their clients on ADA compliance because it hasn't been an issue in the last, I mean, probably, I know really things started getting going like in the late 2000, like teens, like 2017. I know a lot of companies getting sued for non-compliance, like Netflix, H&R Block, Domino's. But we're trying now to educate our clients on, hey, like we now know, like with these laws being passed and with the WCAG guidelines being passed, that we can help, like we can help you build a website that's compliant. As far as like, where do you see ADA compliance, especially with the new law that's being passed in California, AB 1757? Where do you see the compliance standards going? Have you seen them just increasingly uptick in like the burden being just a greater burden being placed on business owners?
Yeah, I mean, I think the new law has a pretty broad application, right? So it's going to encompass nearly anybody who's got an online presence of any kind, right? If you've got a mobile app, that's going to fall under. If you've got a website, you're going to be covered. And I think just the shift in guidelines, we were at 2.0, and I think we're going now to 2.1 if this law passes. And I think the bigger issue too is, I would imagine there's not too many businesses that are capable or desirous of having two separate websites, one for California and then one for the rest of the world, to the extent that the new guidelines don't apply. So I suspect that anyone who has a presence in California or consumers in California are going to need to update their website to be compliant here, so they're not running the risk of potential lawsuits or complaints down the road. So I think it has not only a broad impact for businesses in this state, but also sort of nationwide for individuals and businesses who are using California as a platform for retail and everything else.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know New York and California are leading the way in terms of lawsuits being filed, or at least, well, lawsuits and demand letters. But then I know Colorado right now is looking on a new bill for ADA web compliance. And it seems like with anything else, any other laws that are being passed, if those three states are going full steam ahead on those, then it's just a matter of time before the rest of the country passes similar laws. If you could just like walk me through, like, what have you seen in terms of an experience of one of your clients? Like they get these demand letters, they reach out to you. Like what are you seeing? Like, what's a typical experience for you when you're working with a business owner?
Yeah, so I mean, often, I mean, business owners, unfortunately, again, they get demand letters all the time, and so we try to advise people to not ignore those. I think a lot of times it's frustrating, especially in this state, but we typically get those sent to us. We review them, and as you know, I mean, the ADA, there's quite a few requirements, and so what generally happens is the ADA letter or demand letter is going to lay out whatever those issues are that they see, for lack of a better word, is it ingress egress issues? Is it, what type of accessibility issues are they seeing? And then they'll lay out the particular part of the statute that says that you have to do this. And then there's a demand for, damages. And typically what we have to do then is assess those. We get our clients to look to see whether or not this is in fact true. And unfortunately, oftentimes, they haven't spoken to whoever put their website together for quite a while. So, they kind of throw their hands up in the air going, I had no idea this is a thing. I can't get a hold of somebody to tell me if this is true or not. So it becomes a little bit of a battle, I think, knowledge wise for some of our clients, to understand what this means technically for them, and whether or not the allegations in the demand letter are true. Worst case scenario, they are. And so then it's a conversation about, all right, what are our next steps? Are we answering a complaint? Are we negotiating a settlement? And then ultimately, 100% of the time, part of this is taking steps to fix those non-compliant issues. And so in addition to dealing with the settlement, it's also engaging another company to come in and fix those problems. And depending on the age, it could be a whole new website. So
Yeah.
it's can be a kind of a costly mistake, unfortunately.
We're seeing that 26% of businesses that have been hit with a demand letter once already get hit with a second demand letter because they go through that process that you're talking about where they basically just settle to make the demand letter go away, but they don't make the investment to retool their website. And so they get hit again. And I don't know how much you've had experience with clients coming back a second time and being hit with a same lawsuit.
We have in other contexts. I have colleagues that have had that situation happen, and it's unfortunate because business owners, especially small business owners, are busy, and a lot of these things kind of go to the wayside because there's so many other things, important things, that come up that are, time sensitive. And so oftentimes we try to build in a long lead time in order to fix, the issues, but there is statutory requirements around that. And you you try to counsel your clients the best to keep this at the forefront, because what you certainly don't want to have happen is exactly what you're talking about, either a second bite of the apple by the same plaintiff or something larger like a class action. That's just a much larger headache and a much more expensive fix.
Yeah. So as an attorney, what would be your ideal scenario in a situation where you have a client that does get a demand letter? Like how can one of your clients best protect themselves? So when you see the demand letter, you're like, okay, if we can produce X, Y, and Z, we can, fight this and make this go away and not even have to worry about settling.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got a compliant website, right, and you've got the records showing that you've done it, and you've got the certifications, I mean, that's the best position ever, right? I mean, it's the most defensible position because we can say, here are the allegations laid out in the demand letter or the complaint, and we've got the evidence showing that that's simply not the case. Although the likelihood that you find that perfect scenario is low because it's hard to comply. It's generally, if somebody is having accessibility issues, it's pretty obvious for the most part, at least from what I've seen. And so as far as going forward, I think it's educating yourself in what the ADA requires. It's educating yourself in what the UNRRA, California's version of that requires. And talking to people like you who understand the technical side of it, because despite the fact that I see these demand letters, there are things that, from a back end compliance issue, that just not my forte. And I'm certainly not going in and fixing these issues on the back end for my clients. So it's having access to sources, like your company that can help answer the questions, where did I go wrong with respect to these particular issues, and B, how do I move forward and have a compliant website, um, and so I don't have to deal with this again.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And the ADA compliance guidelines are vast, like you said. I mean, um, and it is a big burden because, closed captioning needs to be on all videos that are on our website. And we need to make sure that all PDFs are accessible, which rarely are the case. And, some of our clients have like store locators where, we have an olive oil company who sells in a bunch of different locations across the West Coast. And like that plugin that shows where all the locations are may not be accessible. So it's like, what do you do? Like, do you rebuild this? So there's a lot of questions that need to be addressed. And we talk about those when we're building a website. We think about ADA compliance first because it's obviously easier to build a website that's compliant on the front end than trying to go back and make a website compliant after a demand letter comes. But what we're finding and what we're reading in like a lot of the cases that have been fought off successfully is just providing a historical record that you have been doing everything you can to keep your website in compliance. And that's something that we offer all of our clients that work with us through ADA Shield, which is our ADA protection, is just having literally a vault of documents that show, look, we've been having 329 or another agency, if someone has a different agency they're working with, go in and make monthly, quarterly updates and like remediation. And we've seen that that is the best defense for a demand letter because in my opinion, you can correct me if I'm wrong, right now the AB 1757 is going to go to 2.2 on the WCAG, which is like the highest that you can go to right now.
I mean, the downside, there's no lead time, right? I mean, they're not necessarily making this, retrograde, but there's no, once the law goes into effect, I mean, those have to be complied with now. And
Right.
so, as now that we're fairly, I mean, it's still in its stages of going through the judicial or the legislative process, but the likelihood that this gets passed is pretty high. So, I mean, for you guys, right, it makes a lot of sense to be talking to your client saying, hey, the time is now, because once that law goes into effect, oftentimes the legislature will give us time to comply with it. You have to be in compliance by, January 1, 2026. So it gives you a year to talk to your developers, your sites, and get everything into compliance. And that's really not the case, at least the way that the law is drafted right now, which is a little scary, right? Because it opens you up to potential exposure almost right away.
Yeah, every single client that we've talked to, they're like, wait, there's no lead time? Like, we have to do this right now? And we're like, yeah. And they're like, why didn't anyone tell us about this? And unfortunately, I can never answer that question, but that doesn't mean that, the law doesn't need to be followed. And I think what we're finding is if we can stack up a bunch of evidence for a business owner that says this business owner takes ADA web compliance seriously, look at this track record, those plaintiffs that are just out for basically just a quick settlement will go away and move on to the next person. And so we're really putting a lot of time and energy into making sure that we have a detailed process for showing evidence for our clients so that, whether it's the client contacting us or if you're their attorney, you're contacting us and saying, hey, there's a demand letter. Do you have evidence that shows that they've been doing everything they can to be in compliant? That goes a really long way to making sure that the demand letter just stops in its tracks.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I don't know if you want to talk about the fact that the new law has a shared liability for those business owners as well as their web developers. So
Yeah.
it creates a different scenario, right? Because like you were saying, it's very easy to call someone, an architect or a contractor to say, build me this. I expect that you know your way around the rules and that the door is supposed to be, this wide and the ramp's supposed to be, at this angle. And I think up until now, web developers have been able to say, sure, we're compliant, and you go on your merry way. And again, it's just your website. I think still business owners that have had businesses for a long time don't always think of their website the same way that you would your brick and mortar buildings. But now, I mean, there's definitely some shared liability with some potential indemnity there. So, you've as an owner, if you hired somebody who said, "Yep, we'll build you a compliant site," and they don't, you've got grounds for a claim against them. So it's definitely pulling as many people into that pool as possible to share responsibility for ensuring that the ADA is complied with in its most broadest sense.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. I agree 100% with that. And I think it's finally time that developers are held accountable for what they tell clients. And I feel like in our industry, we're constantly fighting against people's bad experiences with previous developers, whether it's they promised, their SEO is going to be amazing, and then they ended up not doing any work. And like we take a look at it and it's like, your SEO is terrible. Like, and we can show them like what wasn't done. And I feel like ADA compliance is the same way. And we can, like show clients like, here's your website. We run it through a scanner. We show them what we're doing to make it compliant for ADA. And I think it's only fair that business owners can go back and hold the developer responsible if they promised an ADA compliant site. And we're doing, we are also looking after our own interest in terms of sometimes we build a site for a client and they want certain features that are not ADA compliant. And we actually have them sign a contract that says 329 has said that they know this is not ADA compliant. They have basically advised against it. We are assuming that liability and ignoring the advice of 329 because we don't want them to be able to come back and sue us for something that we knew wasn't compliant in the beginning. And we said, you shouldn't do this. So our biggest goal obviously is to make the internet as accessible to all. Having an accessible website helps SEO, and obviously it increases revenue because the more people that can do business with you, the better. And then we are really adamant about protecting clients, especially as business owners ourselves. We know how hard it is to run a business and to run it well. And we want to make sure that we give all of our clients and any business owner like the tools necessary to protect themselves, because for whatever reason, this is not being talked about widely, but there's a lot of changes coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, I think there's some significant ones, and the law continues to develop in this area. So we'll, as these statutes come out, and I think, again, California leading the way and with respect to these changes, I think we're going to definitely see the necessity of business owners to take a look at this issue and definitely address it before it's too late. And because it's definitely too late once you've got that demand letter.
Yeah, there's really nothing you can do. You can't go back on your website and be like, oh, well, that was there the whole time. Like that doesn't happen.
No.
Well, Andrea, I really appreciate your time and talking with me. If business owners need ADA compliance legal help, like where or how can they contact you?
We've got a website, smplawcorp.com. You can email us, call us. We're based out of Sacramento, and we've been around for over a decade now. So look us up and give us a call if you've got any of these types of issues. We're happy to help.
Great. Cool. Thank you. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.